Fuel subsidies, electricity subsidies, these become catchphrases for January, definitive markers of how governments are going to be running their economies in 2012. The IMF would argue, great move. Society would argue, we can't cope. How has news of fuel subsidy or electricity subsidies being removed in East Africa, how's that been received?
Thank you, Lerato. The general view for the consumers is that this is coming at it could not have come at a worse time. We have seen inflation in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania hit the double digits. Numbers coming in from Tanzania show that inflation was at 19.8%. In Uganda, 27%. In Kenya, it eased slightly, but we expect we expect that consumers may not take this very well. We see that the added pressure on the prices of consumer goods may not be taken very positively by consumers. So the outset for 2012 looks quite difficult. For manufacturers, also looks very difficult.
I'm glad you mentioned manufacturers, because authorities have argued that electricity subsidies have tended to benefit manufacturers more than the common man on the street, because to a large extent, those are the largest utilizers of electricity in the production process. So businesses, how will they cope with the removal of subsidies?
Well, that's true what you've pointed out. We've seen penetration levels in the East African region are generally low. So most of the bulk consumers of power are the manufacturing industries. The cost of production is likely to steeply rise on the back of higher energy costs. And we see them trying to pass this to consumers. If they're not able to pass this in full, we expect to see pressure on margins. We also expect to see probably increased competition because of the possibility of an influx of imports, now that local goods may become much more expensive.
Now, in Tanzania, news just out is that the regulator has granted the sole distributor a tariff hike of 40%, whereas what they actually wanted was 155%. Now, the argument is, without higher tariffs, the electricity distributors can't expand their networks, can't provide electricity for all citizens. So it becomes a catch-22 in many ways in that respect. The governments and their savings on subsidies should also be major investors in infrastructure. Those programs of infrastructure investments, how far have they come? The political will, does it really exist?
Well, the situation in Tanzania has been that TANESCO would like to invest more in distribution assets. However, it has run operating losses over the past few years. So the tariff increase is actually necessary. This is the second successive increase, given that in 2011 they raised tariffs by 18.5%. The regulatory authority allowing them to raise tariffs by 40% is acknowledging the fact that Tanzania has faced acute power shortages in 2011, and there is need for someone to step in and allow the tariffs to be raised, to allow for further investment in infrastructure for power development in Tanzania. So in the long term, this is a positive development, although right now, probably given the current macroeconomic situation, may not have come at the right time.
All right, so timing is a factor here, but these are the figures. Uganda, for them to remove subsidies, the government makes a savings of 1.5 trillion, because that's what it spent in subsidies in the past 6 years. What is it going to do with all this money now that it's retaining it?
There's been pressure towards development of hydropower plants in Uganda. There's a Bujagali project that has been on course. I think with this development, it is hoped that the resources will be diverted towards development of some of these hydropower plants. Currently, Uganda utilizes thermal plants, which are a bit more expensive, so it's just going to put pressure to the government to focus resources towards infrastructure development that's likely to bring in more returns in the long run.
And Emma, finally, for the consumers who may see less shilling in their pockets as they pay for services like electricity, what could be done to buffer them? I'm not advocating another subsidy regime, but something just to ease the strain. What would that be?
probably still no short-term solution looks to be available. I think the the best thing that they would do is invest in cheaper sources of power. So shift the cost, because power purchase costs have risen. So just try and ease the cost of power by investing in cheaper sources of power, such as hydro and, where possible, geothermal, for example, in the Kenyan scenario.